As you can see, I think it is a moral imperative that the North Korean regime falls, the Korean Peninsula becomes unified, and Kim Jong-un is brought to justice. I'm not going to go through the entire history of how we got here, but this is an easy case to make, because we can look at the evidence and realize that North Korea is the living embodiment of George Orwell's 1984, and the textbook definition of absolute despotism. But don't take my word for it. This is the UN Human Rights Council's report of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This summation from the findings and recommendations should fairly paraphrase the depth of despair in this rogue state. Systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations have been and are being committed by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, its institutions, and officials. In many instances, the violations of human rights found by the Commission constitute crimes against humanity. These are not mere excesses of the state. They are essential components of a political system that has moved far from the ideals on which it claims to be founded. The gravity, scale, and nature of these violations reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. Political scientists of the 20th century characterize this type of political organization as a totalitarian state. A state that does not content itself with ensuring the authoritarian rule of a small group of people, but seeks to dominate every aspect of its citizens' lives and terrorizes them from within. So looking at that summary description, we can now look at the evidence of why nations like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Somalia, India, the war-torn nations of Africa cannot compare to North Korea. Now, the first example we'll look at is simple freedom of movement. North Korea has virtually none, with the very limited exception of a few within the inner circle of the Korean Workers' Party, which is the official party of the DPRK. It's a one-party state. And again, this is the exception and not the rule. Within the borders, North Korea not only tightly monitors and controls the movement of its citizens, but this is further exacerbated by the primitive, outdated, and underfunded public infrastructure outside of Pyongyang, such as trains, highways, and other transportational systems. To put it plainly, even if they had freedom of movement, which they don't, it would be damn near impossible for them to move. And with that, we need to examine the ideological foundation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Let me introduce you to Juche or Juche. The core ideological concept and guiding political principle of the DPRK for several decades has been Juche, meaning autonomy, independence, or self-reliance. In his frequent commentary on the Juche idea, Kim Il-sung regularly pointed to U.S. imperialism as the main enemy of third world peoples, and advocated Juche as the very embodiment of anti-imperialism. The DPRK portrayed the North Korean struggle against the U.S. and South Korea as identical with the struggle of third world peoples for independence and completely compatible with proletarian internationalism. We should unite closely with the peoples of all the socialist countries. We should actively support the Asian, African, and Latin American peoples struggling to throw off the imperialist yoke and strengthen solidarity with them. Now, it's worth noting that this is how Marxist collectivism begins. It begins with an idea that there is a perpetrator and a victim. All victims are the same, and all perpetrators are the same. For North Korea and other communist and socialist nations, the perpetrators were the First World, Western Europe, and America. The victims were all of the oppressed nations from the colonial periods such as Latin America, African, and many of the South and Southeast Asian countries. And this was despite the fact that colonialization to that point was nearly dying out, save some African nations and French Indochina or Vietnam. Now, that's not to say that there still wasn't a great amount of Western influence in the post-colonial world, and there can be arguments made about territories such as Guam, Okinawa, and places like the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar. But again, this was Marxist philosophy to the T. Divide between oppressor and oppressed, revolt, build the socialist model, and control all means of production so that the evils of Western capitalism can't infect the perfectly equal society. But like my dude Styx Hexenhammer 666 said so perfectly,
and the communists of today, who are few and far between, thankfully, still say, oh, it wasn't real communism, oh, it was never implemented properly, real communism's never been tried. Okay, well, it's such a failure it can't even be implemented. The New York Times should be, you should tell the New York Times that. They think it was a real communist revolution, really helped women's rights. It helped them have the right to be equal to men, equally fucking miserable, because they were all peasants, they were all starving slaves.
They are only equal in the sense that they are in an equal state of despair. Which brings me to the next portion of why North Korea should fall, and that is their extreme and brutal violations of civil liberties. This is from the same UN report I cited earlier. Violations of the freedoms of thought, expression, and religion. Point 26. Throughout the history of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, among the most striking features of the state has been its claim to an absolute monopoly over information and total control of organized social life. The Commission finds that there is an almost complete denial of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, as well as of the rights to freedom of opinion, expression, information, and association. Point 27. The state operates an all-encompassing indoctrination machine that takes root from childhood to propagate an official personality cult and to manufacture absolute obedience to the supreme leader, effectively to the exclusion of any thought independent of official ideology and state propaganda. Propaganda is further used by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to incite nationalistic hatred towards official enemies of the state, including Japan, the United States of America, and the Republic of Korea and their nationals. Point 28. Virtually all social activities undertaken by citizens of all age are controlled by the Workers' Party of Korea, through the associations that are run and overseen by the party into which citizens are obliged to be members. The state is able to monitor its citizens and to dictate their daily activities. State surveillance permeates the private lives of all citizens to ensure that virtually no expression critical of the political system or of its leadership goes undetected. Citizens are punished for any, quote, anti-state activities or expressions of dissent. They are rewarded for reporting on fellow citizens suspected of committing such crimes. This sounds exactly like the League of Spies in 1984. Point 29. Citizens are denied the right to have access to information from independent sources. State-controlled media are the only permitted sources of information in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Access to television and radio broadcasts as well as to the internet is severely restricted, and all media content is heavily censored and must adhere to directives issued by the Workers' Party of Korea. Telephone calls are monitored and mostly confined to domestic connections for citizens. Citizens are punished for watching and listening to foreign broadcasts, including foreign films and soap operas. Moving down to point 30, the state's monopoly on information is therefore being challenged by the increasing flow of outside information to the country and the ensuing curiosity of the people for the, quote, truths, other than those provided by state propaganda. Authorities seek to preserve their monopoly on information by carrying out regular crackdowns and enforcing harsh punishments. Again, this is a report by the United Nations Council on Human Rights. It's not some biased propaganda piece by Western imperialists. But you may clearly think this is propaganda. It's just the Western man trying to keep them down. Well, how about this? This is a clip from Yeonmi Park and her testimony of life in North Korea.
North Korea is an unimaginable country. There is only one channel on TV. There is no internet. We aren't free to sing, say, wear, or think what we want. North Korea is the only country in the world that executes people for making unauthorized international phone calls. North Koreans are being terrorized today. When I was growing up in North Korea, I never saw anything about love stories between men and women. No books, no songs, no press, no movies about love stories. There is no Romeo and Juliet. Every story was propaganda to brainwashes about the Kim dictators. I was born in 1993, and I was abducted at birth, even before I knew the words freedom or human rights. North Koreans are desperately seeking and dying for freedom at this moment. When I was 9 years old, I saw my friend's mother publicly executed. Her crime, watching a Hollywood movie. Expressing doubt about the greatness of the regime can get 3 generations of a family imprisoned or executed. When I was 4 years old, I was warned by my mother not to even whisper. The birds and mice couldn't hear me. I admitted, I thought The North Korean dictator could read my mind. My father died in China after we escaped North Korea. And I had to bury him at 3 a.m. in secret. I was 14 years old. I couldn't even cry. I was afraid to be sent back to North Korea. The day I escaped North Korea, I saw my mother raped. The rapist was a Chinese broker. He targeted me. I was 13 years old. There is a saying in North Korea, women are weak, but mothers are strong. My mother allowed herself to be raped in order to protect me. North Korean refugees, about 300,000, are vulnerable in China. 70% of North Korean and teenage girls are being victimized, sometimes sold for as little as $200. We walked across the Gobi Desert, following a compass. When they stopped working, we followed the stars to freedom. I felt only the stars were with us. Mongolia was our freedom moment. Death or dignity. Armed with knives, we were prepared to kill ourselves if we were going to be sent back to North Korea. We wanted to live as humans.
That is a really difficult clip to watch, and I think that would really tug at anybody's heartstrings. So let's take a brief look at the punishments in the prisons. Political prisoners are taken to camps like these, scattered throughout isolated areas of the country. They comprise many prison labor colonies in secluded mountain valleys completely isolated from the outside world. The total number of prisoners is estimated to be 150,000 to 200,000. Yorak Camp and Buchang Camp are separated into two sections. One section for political prisoners in lifelong detention, another part similar to re-education camps with prisoners sentenced to long-term imprisonment with the vague hope of eventual release. The prisoners are forced to perform hard and dangerous slave work with primitive means in mining and agriculture. The food rations are very small, so that the prisoners are constantly on the brink of starvation. In combination with the hard work, this leads to huge numbers of prisoners dying. An estimated 40% of prisoners die from malnutrition. Moreover, many prisoners are crippled from work accidents, frostbite, or torture. There is a rigid punishment regime in the camps. Prisoners who work too slowly or do not obey an order are beaten or tortured. In cases of stealing food or attempting to escape, the prisoners are publicly executed. On the other hand, political dissidents are taken to camps like these throughout the nation which are similarly austere. The re-education camps for criminals are run by the Ministry of People's Security. There is a fluent passage between common crimes and political crimes as people who get on the bad side of influential partisans are often denounced on false accusations. They are then forced into false confessions with brutal torture in detention centers and are then condemned in a brief show trial to a long-term prison sentence. In North Korea, political crimes are greatly varied, from border crossing to any disturbance of the political order, and they are rigorously punished. Due to the dire prison conditions with hunger and torture, a large percentage of prisoners do not survive their sentence terms. The situation of prisoners is quite similar to that in the political prison camps. They have to perform slave labor in prison factories, and in case they do not meet the work quotas, they are tortured and confined for many days in special prison cells, which are too small for them to stand up or lie full length in. To be distinguished from the internment camps for political prisoners, the re-education camp prisoners are forced to undergo ideological instruction after work. And they are also forced to memorize the speeches of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, and they even have to undergo self-criticism rites. Many prisoners are guilty of common crimes, which are also penalized in other countries, such as illegal border crossing, stealing food, or illegal trading. And if you do a simple Google search of sketches done by North Korean defectors, you will find dozens of pictures showing pregnant women being attacked by dogs, kicked in the stomach, being choked, being aborted with machetes, men eating rats and snakes, scales of the emaciated and the dying. And now they are threatening us with nuclear weapons, claiming Trump is the aggressor. North Korea is literally like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, and I think they are at the point where they become a made man and will subsequently be shot in the back of the head. This saber rattling is nothing new, and make no mistake about it. If anyone watching this believes for 1 second that Secretary Mattis will allow this kind of aggression, then it would behoove you to remove your heads from the fourth point of entry. This would be the greatest human liberation conquest in generations. There are 28 million people being physically and psychologically enslaved by a brutal dictator and a totalitarian and tyrannical ideology. The treasure is worth the cost, the sweat is worth expending, the tears are worth shedding, and the blood is worth being spilt. This is the single most moral cause, possibly since the Second World War, and it needs to happen 25 years ago. Trump should give the North Korean generals 48 hours to turn Kim Jong-un over to The Hague, provide them immunity by sparing their lives as leverage, and enforce the purpose of reunification for the sake of life and liberty. If they refuse, the West and the Asian allies should enforce a no-fly zone over the North, blockade the coasts, commence the most ferocious blitzkrieg in the modern era, invade from every angle, and not stop until they reach Pyongyang. Once Kim and his inner party are apprehended, the South should occupy the North with reunification. They should impose a democratic republic. They should reunite the families. And finally, they should forever declare the Workers' Party of Korea a terrorist organization, because it is.